Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is In the Great Unknown by Frater, John Gottlieb Halbedel, F.R.C. An article taken from Rosicrucian Digest, Volume 13, Number 6, July 1935. And the Great Unknown by Frater John Gottlieb Halbedel, F.R.C. When the Hawaiian Islands were still mountain tops in a land of perpetual spring, and the pyramid of Cheops was not yet built, man sought to pierce the mysteries of nature. Long before Atlantis disappeared, leaving but a few mountain peaks to posterity, which now are known as the Azores, man attempted to penetrate the riddle of the universe. Long before Noah received the command to build his ark to weather the coming deluge, and long before men's tongues were confused during the building of the famous Tower of Babel, men were wont to gather in certain places to discuss what puzzled them and intrigued their minds. Long before Mark Antony and the Cleopatra chose to journey together in another life, and long before Socrates sought refuge among his disciples to escape the distracting tantrums of a termagant wife, men sought to search out the secrets of the world about them. Men philosophized long before Euclid conceived and formulated his now famous postulate of parallels, which was destined to drive mathematicians to distraction for 20 centuries, and which some geometers struggled to prove, only to be invariably compelled to relinquish their work as a useless task, because forced to the distracting realization that the celebrated Euclidean postulate of parallels was incapable of proof. And most certain it is that long before the mythologies of India, Persia, Greece, Rome, and the sagas of the North were written, and the story of the Nativity became accomplished facts, the mind of man sought to penetrate the unseen and observe the invisible. When men's thoughts first sought to pierce the veil of a world intangible, like beams of light breaking through a thinning fog, they had become philosophers. When men first experimented with the tangible earthly things and substances, they had become scientists. Henceforth, then, man is first a philosopher and secondly a scientist. The philosopher reasons, the scientist experiments, observes, speculates, and doubts. Therefore, no man can be just one or the other. He must be both. Hence, it becomes obvious that man is a philosopher-scientist. Thought, study, observation, and experience cause him to formulate a philosophy of his own, which no amount of persuasion may change, but is always becoming better with experience. It is universally understood that every person has a conception of the world in which he lives, and also a philosophy that cautions him whither he should go, and what he should or should not do when the compelling current of life has left him at the crossroad of an already eventful existence. If tutored by competent scholars in a school or system of philosophy, a person may still and forevermore follow the urge and dictates of his own philosophy, which with some exceptions constitutes the sum total of his experience as a philosopher-scientist in a world of beings and things seen and unseen. But with this difference, a person's thoughts are guided into constructive channels, and his efforts directed in a practical way and to serve practical purposes. This is undoubtedly a considerable improvement over the personal philosophy without proper guidance. The story of philosophy has been written in practically every language, and wherever told, it thrilled the souls of men. And whenever its story is finished, one invariably is forced to the realization that the utopia of every philosopher is conceived as a land peopled with a race of men and women living in peace and prosperity, governed by the experts in the various trades and sciences, and guided by the wisest of their men. The philosopher's utopia presented in the Republic of Plato is of an extremely delicate nature, being patterned after a spiritual, mystical conception, rather than in conformity with the more materialistic views and moral precepts of his time. The idealism of Platonic philosophy, therefore, is opposed to materialism and sensationalism. With Plato and Aristotle, the former as the teacher of the latter, as with most of the great Greek thinkers, philosophy was not looked upon as mere speculation or to while away one's time. To these noble souls, philosophy meant wisdom, and wisdom meant wise action. Wise action meant virtue, and virtue meant the attainment of perfection, nirvana. To the philosophic soul, nirvana represents that ecstatic state of being in which the soul is returning to its source by being absorbed into deity. Time came when Plato the teacher and Aristotle the pupil rose from their beautiful gardens and halls of learning and joined the great masters, bequeathing to posterity their writings. Their great works were destined to exert a great and constructive influence over men and nations and determine the destinies of races of men and women and kings and rulers. Plato and Aristotle are looked upon as the last of the ancient philosophers. It is significant to note that it was the mission of these two intrepid souls, the last of their famous line, to create and bequeath to thousands of succeeding generations of men and women their immortal works and writings that were to prove of inestimable value as very practical guides to kings and emperors, presidents and governors, lawmakers and lawgivers in the governing of those incapable of self-government. Plato's mystic idealism, in the light of later historical and scientific developments and achievements, appears almost prophetic in its transcendental aspect as a philosophy. The Politics of Aristotle, his pupil and disciple, contains a more tangible structure of philosophy, one that seems more acceptable to those less idealistic than Plato. The Republic of Plato and the Politics of Aristotle have proved a veritable treasure as a source of knowledge and reference for statesmen, teachers, and students of philosophy and science. With the death of Plato and Aristotle, who to modern times represent the entire school of Greek philosophy, the glorious age of brilliant philosophers came to a close. Their legacy to the coming generations was a constructive system of philosophy and of social and political science. While the names of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle remained as eloquent symbols of three great lights in the firmament of ancient philosophy, philosophy all but died and passed out of existence. Century after century passed. Philosophy seemed to be doomed to an interminable banishment from the minds of men. The intellectual darkness that creeped over Greece and Rome finally enveloped all Europe. Superstition, ignorance, wars and revolutions which blunted the minds of men and stunted the growth of intellect and initiative in men and women alike in the course of centuries, plunged nation after nation deeper and ever deeper into chaos and intellectual darkness. The people of many lands were at the mercy of those few whose personal philosophy of life was founded in the perverted doctrine of might is right. The period of history between the death of Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and the birth of Francis Bacon, the first modern philosopher, was indeed one of hardships and decadence for all civilized peoples. The Dark Middle Ages were dark indeed. Thus, for 1,000 years, darkness hovered over every land and nation. Anxious eyes scanned the horizon of the future for a fearless torchbearer to bring light into this awful darkness. And to Francis Bacon fell the mission to wake philosophy from its millennial slumber. This came to pass in an age when mankind waited for some great soul, wise enough and fearless, to raise from the ruins and debris of centuries of wars and strifes the philosophy of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. To this wonderful man, who believed himself born for the service of mankind, fell the extremely difficult task and mission of redeeming philosophy from its entombment of 1,000 years of yesterdays and heralding its resurrection in the dawn of a new and glorious age of philosophy and science. Sir Francis Bacon was the first great philosopher and thinker of modern times, just as Amenhotep IV is called the first modern king. The strange life and political career of this truly remarkable man offer countless incidents and experiences reminiscent of the lives of famous personalities connected with the distant Rosicrucian past. There are investigators and authorities on manuscripts who assert that Bacon is the real author of all the Shakespearean plays, so-called basing their assertions upon certain secret signs and symbols used by Bacon and found in all his writings. Bacon's The New Atlantis is not just a commonplace story of an ordinary imagination. It is, to all intents and purposes, a prognostication of much that has actually come to pass. The New Atlantis is the utopia of Bacon, the philosopher-scientist. This remarkable narrative was never finished. Its author, much misunderstood by his contemporaries and abused for his kindness and generosity toward friends and enemies alike, died in retirement. leaving the New Atlantis only partly written for reasons sufficient unto its author. Before Bacon passed on to join the intellectual lights that had shone in the firmament of philosophy and science before him, he, his extremely difficult mission fulfilled, bequeathed his soul to God and his body to the soil whence it had come. His name he left to the ages past and to come, his works to foreign nations. His spirit is still a guiding factor in the world of philosophy, science, and literature. His works still exert a powerful influence upon the thoughts of men and women here and abroad. Francis Bacon's name is still revered by philosophers and scientists alike. It is indelibly written into the records of Father Time and added to the names of those who also have contributed their best to the welfare and progress of mankind and human achievement, being thus perpetuated to the ages and future generations of men and women. In this manner passed away Sir Francis Bacon, Baron Verulam and Viscount St. Albans, English lawyer, statesman and philosopher, mystic and lover of mankind, joining his peers and having spanned the treacherous gap of 1,000 years of mental and cultural darkness, which had separated the ancient and the modern world. His singular mission was fulfilled. Bacon had linked the ancient world of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle with the new world of philosophy, science, and literature, so mote it be. Bacon's The New Atlantis was published posthumously with his last work entitled Silva Silvarum. The New Atlantis has been read by many and criticized. However, few have been able to penetrate the subtlety of his reasoning in this particular manuscript and contribution to the wealth and gems of literature which Bacon so effectively employed to veil the true purpose and character of his prophetic narrative, which is of an allegorical nature. According to his many critics, the story, The New Atlantis, begins in the most artfully artless way. This is truly the case. However, it is in this very artful artlessness that the subtlety of his philosophical reasoning is concealed, to trip up the unwary, and especially those who are naturally inclined to jump to illogical, unscientific, and unphilosophical conclusions. In his own characteristic artful artlessness, Socrates, who possessed the most encyclopedic mind of all time, ensnared his opponents and drove them either to distraction or forced them into admissions or silence. Bacon was no less subtle in his own way. The New Atlantis is a classic example of Baconian subtlety and philosophic reasoning. The famous author of The New Atlantis had ample time to complete his remarkable narrative, yet it was never completed. Many scholars and his own friends and certain contemporaries regretted that this intriguing story was never entirely told. All wondered why its singularly gifted author left it unfinished. What prompted or prevented this strange man from continuing and completing his story of the New Atlantis? At times, one is almost tempted to believe that Bacon purposely left incomplete the story of the New Atlantis, leaving it to posterity to supply the time and the place and the characters, as well as a happy ending to his allegory, a strange story of a strange voyage of fearless souls to foreign shores, of their fateful landing on an island peopled with a race of men skilled in many trades and sciences, and wise men pious and merciful, and all versed in the practical wisdom of the sages of ancient times. This is Bacon's utopia, the ideal state and republic of the philosopher, king, and scientist. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.